Hi everyone, my name is Jennifer and today we're going to talk about how to study Ayn Rand's ideas. This is going to be a good introduction for those people who are very new to Ayn Rand and are interested in understanding her philosophy better. Because of course there are people who are interested in Ayn Rand, but they're just interested because they've heard she has some good novels and good stories. And if that's the case, if you're not that interested in understanding what the philosophy is about, well, you can start with any of the novels. You know, she has 3 main novels. Wait, no, it's 4 novels and a few plays and short stories. So you could start anywhere. But if you're looking to understand the philosophy, there's a way to do it. And of course, this is my personal opinion. I'm not some expert. I just have been reading and studying Rand's work for more than 10 years. So where do you start? Well, there is a lot of objectivist content out there. You know, there are Ayn Rand's novels, there's her nonfiction, there's literature by other objectivist authors, there are introductory videos, but really the best place to start is with Ayn Rand's novels, particularly with Atlas Shrugged. And I think you should start with Atlas Shrugged because it is the most comprehensive overview of her philosophy in a dramatic way. Because there's no better way to explain and understand ideas than by dramatizing them, right? Like, have you heard the saying, show don't tell? Like, you will learn how to do a task that you have never done before by watching somebody do it than by hearing somebody explaining to you how they do it. So show don't tell. That's what you would get in Atlas Shrugged. You would see how Ayn Rand's philosophy plays out in what she's criticizing about the current day philosophy, as opposed to having to read an essay that explains the ideas, but you don't really see how they apply in the world, right? So I would leave the nonfiction for much later. Start with the novel, start with Atlas Shrugged. I know it's the longest book and some people might be like, hey, that's too much for a beginner, but it really is not. Anybody that has a decent level of education and a decent intellectual capacity would be able to get through it and understand it. Some people are gonna take much longer to read it. Some people are gonna read it very fast, but most people with, high school education or college education and have some interest in books and ideas are going to be able to understand it. Of course, if you're someone who never reads books and like you're not remotely intellectual, obviously this book or any book is going to be too much. And now the next would be to read more of her novels. Read The Fountainhead next or Anthem, either of those two. And then With the Living should be optional. Of course, I recommend that a lot because it's a great story. But in terms of representing the philosophy, all the other 3 novels do a better job, especially Atlas Shrugged. So you really want to see how the philosophy plays out in the world. The only people who I'd say can skip the novels or leave the novels for later are people who are already on board with some of Ayn Rand's ideas, like capitalism, rational self-interest, people who support free speech, those type of people who are already on board with some of Ayn Rand's more radical ideas could probably leave the novels for later and start with the essays if you just want to understand where Ayn Rand's coming from in terms of those ideas. However, people who are very new to Ayn Rand's radical ideas should definitely start with the novels, and then after you read 2 or 3 of her novels, you could start with the nonfiction. And there's a lot of nonfiction literature by Ayn Rand and other objectivist writers, but you should really start with Ayn Rand. That's the place to start. Ayn Rand pretty much has an essay explaining or expounding on every radical idea she stands for. Every aspect of her philosophy, almost everything she wrote about it in an essay form or in an article. And a lot of these essays are actually available online, and some of them are available in like essay collections. So you should really start there with Ayn Rand's nonfiction. I recommend you start with The Virtue of Selfishness. or essays in objectivist thought, or Capitalism, the Unknown Ideal, if you're more interested in Ayn Rand's view on economics and capitalism. But if you're interested in understanding the morality of her philosophy, start with The Virtue of Selfishness and Essays in Objectivist Thought. There are other books, of course, like Philosophy Who Needs It, but I would recommend the first three. Now, what about the objectivist literature by other objectivist authors that are not Ayn Rand? Well, I think that literature is a great resource for when you want to understand how Ayn Rand's ideas and her philosophy apply to current day issues, right? For instance, if you wanted to get a better perspective on how Ayn Rand's ideas apply to legal issues of today, you could read some Tara Smith. Or if you want to understand the objectivist perspective on issues of finance in today's world, you could read some Yaron Brook, right? That's the value of today's writers. There are a few objectivist writers who have tried to explain Ayn Rand's philosophy, and some of them do a good job, but there's no one who does a better job at explaining her own philosophy than Ayn Rand. So you should really start with Ayn Rand's nonfiction before moving on to other objectivist writers. And of course, one of the best objectivist authors that is not Ayn Rand herself is Leonard Peikoff, who is her intellectual heir. So you can actually find some of his essays in some of these books where there's a bunch of Ayn Rand essays and a few Leonard Peikoff essays about objectivism and their application. So he's obviously a great resource to read too. Now, what if you don't want to read the novels and you just want to get a better perspective of a specific aspect of Ayn Rand's philosophy? Well, instead of jumping in and reading a book like Objectivism, the Philosophy of Ayn Rand, which is very dense, just look for a specific essay by Ayn Rand where she talks about that specific issue. For example, if you're just interested in understanding why Ayn Rand opposed altruism, guess what? There is an essay out there by Ayn Rand where she explains why she opposes it. So a lot of her essays are very specific in case you're wondering, you're just very curious about one single aspect of her philosophy, like why does she support capitalism? There is an essay on that. Or why did she oppose socialized medicine? There's also an essay on that. And now what about all of those introduction to objectivism books and videos and essays that are out there? I really don't recommend beginning there at all. Like I said, you really need to see the ideas dramatized first in the novels before jumping into any of those longer explanations, especially because some of them are very, very dense. So unless you're an academic or someone studying philosophy, you might find them a little boring. And not to say that you shouldn't watch them at some other point, but I would leave that for when you've already been introduced to her philosophy a little bit more, to the novels or to her other nonfiction. And there's this book out there by Leonard Peikoff, who's Ayn Rand's intellectual heir, Objectivism, the Philosophy of Ayn Rand. And you would think this would be a great place to start, right? Like, I'm interested in objectivism, I want to understand it, I should read this book. No, don't do it. This is a very dense book that should be left for much later. And really, I would only recommend to read it if you really want to understand like the basis of Ayn Rand's philosophy, because it's going to go into the basis of philosophy in general, right? Epistemology, metaphysics, concepts, axioms, all of those things. So if you're not like that passionate about philosophy in general, you don't really need to read these. There are other more digestible introductions to objectivism out there. But yeah, this is a great book for, academic people or super intellectual people or people who want to dedicate a lot more time to the study of Ayn Rand's ideas. But yeah, those are my recommendations. If you have any other questions on which book to read first or where to find her books, you can ask me in the comment section. And before I leave, I want to let you know about a fundraising campaign I'm running, because I'm trying to produce an animated version of a very cool scene from Atlas Shrugged. I'm gonna leave the link to the campaign below. If you love Atlas Shrugged and want to see a very cool animated tribute to one of the best scenes in the novel, I encourage you to check that out and consider contributing so that it can actually come to life. But other than that, thank you for watching, and I'll see you again next time.